G'day everybody, it's Dan here at Pilates with Dan with your next instalment of our tutorial lessons. Today we're going to combine two different movements because they're kind of closely related and they kind of meld well together. The two movements that we're talking about today we call here in the studio the chest lift and the hula. Okay, so the chest lift and the hula are what we consider to be sort of pre-Pilates exercises. They're not really something from the traditional Pilates repertoire, but think of these as kind of stepping stones towards doing some of the Pilates movements. Okay, so the first exercise is called the chest lift. Now the chest lift is, for many of my beginners, one of the first exercises we do on the floor. And if you think back to the tutorial about the 100, which I'll have a link up here, the 100 is Joseph's first mat work class exercise. So when you go to a traditional mat work class, very commonly, almost 100% of the time, the first exercise will be the 100. Now the 100 from a beginner is not, from a beginner's point of view, is not the easiest exercise in the world to start off on. And so think of the chest lift as a preparatory step, getting used to having your head and chest forwards in a forwards flex position and maintaining that there, just strengthening up all those muscles and getting the body used to that movement is what we use the chest lift for. From a beginner point of view. In higher level classes here, we use it as part of a warm-up and in the lead up to doing the 100. For more advanced clients, we tend to not do this very often. Okay, so as a separate exercise. Think of it as a step in a bigger exercise. Okay, that's a very long preamble. So the chest lift is pretty, it can be a bit controversial because we have forward flexion, and so some people feel that that's not necessarily good for neck health and all that jazz. My counter argument to that is, so from side on, if you imagine you're standing up and you have to look down at your shoes, that's what the head is doing in the chest lift. Okay, so if you can look at your shoes while standing, you can do a chest lift fairly safely. However, if looking down causes you pain in those neck joints, this is something that we would possibly build you up towards doing. Okay, so sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just something that maybe we have to get you used to doing and getting those movements, because we want to, as human beings, be able to look down at our feet, look down at our shoes. Okay, look down at the ground that we're walking on. So in terms of what's happening for the neck and head in the chest lift, think of it as kind of like you're looking at your shoes. Okay. Now obviously when you're standing and when you're laying down, gravity is affecting you in slightly different ways. So the chest lift is a exercise in terms of strengthening those neck muscles, the abdominal muscles, that sort of thing. But I'd like to think that we can step it if we need to get you ready. So I'll show you the basic version of that, and then some of the things that we can do around that. Okay, so with the chest lift, quite often with the beginners classes, we'll start in our hook-like position. So it's a very common position to practice your neutral. In a traditional class, you'll be quite often asked to imprint to come up into the 100. Okay, in what we're trying to do with the chest lift is we're trying to get you used to actually being comfortable with the head and neck up in this position, and being able to recognize whether or not you're using your legs as part of the movement, the deeper hip flexors, and just seeing if you can maybe fine tune that a little bit. Okay, there's nothing wrong with using your hip flexors as you come forwards per se, as long as you're aware of what you're doing and see if you can refine that a little bit. Okay, so the hand position, this is one thing I get very pedantic with. what we want to try and do, especially early on, is we want you to be able to support your head with your hands, okay? So some people being in this amount of flexion for this length of time gets very necky. That's not necessarily a bad thing because those neck muscles are working, but I want you to be comfortable and have some fun with it. So sometimes supporting the head in this position here helps release some of these neck muscles a little bit, just a little bit, to allow you to focus a little bit more on the chest lift, okay? Later on we take the hands away, but as I said, we're building you up, okay? So think of this as a pre-Pilates exercise, building you up to be able to do things like the 100, okay? So what the hand position, I like to have one hand on top of the other because I feel that gives me a very stable platform to work from. And the hands are on the back of the skull, they're not on the neck, okay? So make sure that the thumbs and fingers are definitely touching the skull. The breath pattern, as a general rule, when we come into forward flexion, you'll want to be exhaling, but you'll probably find it's more comfortable to do anyway, okay? So inhale to prepare, and then as you exhale, sliding the chin in towards the throat, rib cage down towards the pelvis, and then coming back down. So I'm thinking of trying to pull the front of my ribs down towards my pelvis this way, okay, as I'm coming back down. The lower back is staying fairly stable, and then I'm not allowing, especially when it gets hard, I'm not trying to come up too high so that I tilt my pelvis, okay? So I'm just trying to find that happy spot where I know I'm working my abdominals, just about there, and back down. The other thing I want you to think about as you're practicing the chest lift is where it goes to from this point, okay? So if you find that when we advance you to the 100, you're still getting very necky, it's quite often that you haven't come up high enough. Okay, so I always want you to be thinking about trying to get as much of the shoulder blades off the ground as possible and coming back down. Keep trying to push it a little bit further so that you're not just hanging back here. So this here is not my chest lift, okay? That's a little bit of the fun time stuff, okay? So I'm not working, okay? So it's not high enough. So up here, where I get a little quiver in my voice, because I'm actually having to work here to maintain my position, okay? That's where I want you to find the spot that you work in, okay? And then advance from there. Okay, so that's the basic version of the chest lift. Sometimes, and we quite often do this in the continuing level classes, we extend the legs out, okay? Still doing the same thing, but extended legs. And again, all I'm trying to do is advance you to be able to actually go into the 100 here. So sometimes we'll practice with the legs out straight. Sometimes we'll practice in this position. So the knees are bent up into tabletop, and we'll practice in this position because this leads us into the 5, which is a fabulous abdominal sequence. But being able to actually be in the chest lift with the knees up is an important Pilates position. Okay, so that's the chest lift. What we can do in terms of helping you if you're finding it's challenging is we can take it to a standing position because you're not working against gravity. We can give you small props to use with your feet, with your legs, just to change the angles in the hips and the pelvis and change the where the pressure is in terms of your body. Okay, but the chest lift itself is considered to be a pre-Pilates exercise. It's not part of the Pilates proper repertoire, but hopefully you can see where it goes to. Okay, and then the next exercise, okay, which is the hula. So the hula takes that idea of the chest lift and gives it a little twist. Okay, so it's a rotational movement in a chest lift. So what we're asking you to do with the hula is start to work with the obliques, which are the muscles down the side in the abdomen. Okay, so hand position is still the same. You're going to exhale, come up to the chest lift, hold that position, and then what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring the armpit of the opposite side towards the hip on the opposite side. Okay, so the idea here is I'm going to try and bring my left armpit towards my right hip and exhale to turn. Inhale, center. Other way, exhale to turn. Inhale, center. What I don't want you to do necessarily is when you turn, I don't want this armpit to go further away from this hip. So I don't want you to turn and wave at the camera. Okay, so I don't want you to turn that way because that's going to lose a little bit of the work. But also when we advance this exercise into, there's an exercise in the Pilates repertoire called the crisscross, which is part of the 5 abdominal sequence. So it's where you turn towards the hip and coming up and over. If you're here, you're falling down and you're losing some of the abdominal work. Okay, so up and across, up and across. It is probably for a beginner one of the more technically difficult exercises to master. My key point with the hula when I teach it for my beginners classes is look for less movement. Okay, so don't look for big showy movements. Start off looking for small movements and build that strength when you're going across the body. Don't try and do big movements, especially to start off with the hula. Okay, and just like with the chest lift, it's something that we can advance with the legs out straight, with the legs up in the air. As you saw before, it leads us nicely to the crisscross, okay, which is a nice advancement as well. And we can bring it back if we need to as well. The other little advancement sometimes I play around with in the mat classes is changing the number of repetitions you go to each side. So I call that climbing up the mountain. So sometimes we'll go once each way, then twice each way. And that's purely to build strength, that's all. Feel a little bit of burn, have a little bit of a nice feeling through the abdominals, but it's to build up your strength in preparation for those bigger Pilates movements later on. Okay, so we've included these tutorials in the beginners playlist, and make sure you subscribe and like, and leave a comment down below, see what you want to have next in our tutorial lessons, and hopefully I'll see you in the studio soon. Good luck with your practice.